If you think fences are just for keeping dogs out and nosy neighbors from borrowing sugar without asking, this video will completely change your perspective. I'm talking threats, vandalism, secret land deals, and a teenage dirt biker who thought my backyard was a freeway. One fence, 10 feet high, built to block what I thought was a harmless shortcut, only to uncover an illegal real estate scheme, HOA power plays, and a vice president named Debbie who makes movie villains look subtle. She called the board, she called the cops, she even threatened to burn my house down, and all because her kid couldn't cut across my property anymore. You couldn't script this stuff if you tried. But lucky for you, I saved every single receipt. But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. 6 months ago, I inherited 2 acres of peaceful land in a sleepy neighborhood called River Oaks Estates. It had trees, a stream, and a beat-up cabin that smelled like cedar and opportunity. As a remote software engineer who'd spent the last 10 years trapped in apartments with thin walls and thinner neighbors, this place felt like winning the lifestyle lottery. The plan was simple: renovate the cabin, enjoy the quiet, maybe learn to garden, and finally get a dog. The neighbors waved politely enough. A few even brought over baked goods. I thought I had landed in a postcard. Except for the Richardson family, who treated me like I'd backed over their mailbox on day 1. No eye contact, no waves. Just cold shoulders and tighter lips. At first I didn't care. Not everyone's friendly, and I'm not exactly Mr. Small Talk. But then I started seeing tire tracks across the back of my property, deep ones, and weird trash. Crushed Red Bull cans, snack wrappers, a random sock. My backyard started looking like a gas station parking lot after spring break. One Sunday morning around 6, I woke up to the sound of an ATV engine ripping through the yard like a chainsaw on steroids. I rushed to the window, saw a red four-wheeler tearing through what used to be my uncle's garden, and vanished into the woods. My peaceful retreat had just turned into the opening scene of a low-budget action movie. It kept happening, weekends mostly, sometimes twice a day. The noise was nonstop. My dog freaked out. I couldn't focus on work. Even the squirrels were packing bags. So I did what any tech guy would do, installed a camera. I disguised it as a birdhouse because, well, HOA people tend to scream violation if your camera's not painted beige. And what I caught on that footage made me angrier than a dropped barbecue rib, a teenage boy. Same one every time, ripping across my yard like he owned the deed. Turns out, it was Jason Richardson, Debbie's son. You know, vice president of the HOA, proud owner of a clipboard and an attitude. She was the kind of woman who probably laminated her grocery list and handed out citations for Halloween decorations. Now, I'm not confrontational by nature, but I also don't like being steamrolled, so I called Debbie, found her number on the HOA website, told her politely as a new neighbor that I wasn't thrilled about her son turning my land into his dirt track, and you know what she said? That trail had been used for years. She called it a community path, even dropped the phrase prescriptive easement like she was auditioning for Law and Order Suburbia, claimed it was tradition, said my uncle knew about it and never had a problem. Then she dropped the sugar. I'd hate to see the HOA have to get involved if you decide to disrupt the community. And just like that, my peaceful dream became a battlefield. A war with a woman who thought bylaws were weapons and property lines were optional. I wasn't just some newbie, I was her next target. And this, folks, is where it all begins. Debbie Richardson didn't just treat the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She treated my property like it was a community bike lane with her name stamped on it. When I brought up the ATV issue, she leaned hard into what she called neighborhood tradition. That was her phrase. Tradition. As if repeated trespassing somehow evolved into a protected suburban ritual just because nobody had filed paperwork to stop it. You have to understand, she said, voice dripping with HOA syrup. The trail's been used for years. Your uncle was always very accommodating. which, translated from HOA East, meant, "He never sued us, so now it's ours." I wanted to laugh, but instead I asked, "Do you have any legal easement or right-of-ways documents on file?" Her smile twitched. "We call it a prescriptive easement," she said. Like that made it official. Like if you squint hard enough at enough jargon, your neighbor's yard becomes public domain. Let's break that down. According to Debbie, because people had been cutting across my land for a while, I now had some legal or moral obligation to just let it happen forever. By that logic, if a stranger steals your lunch every day at work and nobody stops them, congratulations, they now own your sandwich. She tossed that term around like she found it on a BuzzFeed list titled 10 Legal Phrases That Sound Impressive But Mean Nothing Without Paperwork. Prescriptive easement, I repeated, giving her just enough rope. "Do you have anything in writing that confirms that?" She shook her head, eyes narrowing. "Well, no, but it's generally understood." And there it was. Debbie's playbook. Say with confidence, smile like a politician, and hope nobody knows better. But she'd made a miscalculation. I wasn't just another passive homeowner who grumbled and moved on. I was a remote-working, keyboard-wielding introvert with time, motivation, and unlimited internet. She had no idea who she was trying to outfox. That night, I dove headfirst into property law like it was my next software sprint. I didn't bring a gun to a knife fight. I brought a printer, 3 highlighters, and an adult-level grudge. I started with the basics: county records, HOA bylaws, state property codes. I found my property survey, confirmed the legal boundary lines, and double-checked the deed. Not a whisper of an easement. Nothing official, just grass, a creek, and an increasingly loud ATV problem. I even searched the public meeting minutes of the HOA, which, by the way, were as exciting as watching beige paint dry. Still, not a single documented mention of any formal trail, shared access path, or any agreement involving my land. Then I called the county zoning office, disguised as curious but friendly, Ethan. "Hey, just making sure I'm not unknowingly hosting a public park." They confirmed. My land was mine, no recorded easement, and as long as any fencing stayed within boundary lines and followed height restrictions, I could build the Great Wall of HOA if I wanted. Debbie had power, but power is loud. Paperwork is patient. So I started planning. While she was off attending real estate conferences in platform heels and name tags, shaking hands and passing out business cards, I was quietly drawing up fence diagrams. I wasn't just going to throw up a wall out of spite. I was going to build a legally bulletproof, HOA-compliant masterpiece. I hired a fence company known for working in tight HOA neighborhoods, the kind that knew how to match paint codes, submit pre-approved material lists, and keep receipts. The installation was scheduled for the following weekend, the same weekend Debbie would be out of town. Coincidence? Absolutely not. I didn't need her calling the city inspector mid-post hole. While I waited, I prepped like I was about to defend my thesis in front of Judge Judy herself. I printed copies of every relevant HOA rule, highlighted every inch of the deed that proved the land was mine and only mine, installed 2 more hidden cameras because if this was going to turn into a war, I was going to record every grenade thrown. And through all of it, I kept smiling at the neighbors, mowing my lawn, waving politely, and pretending like nothing was happening. But in the background, I was drawing a very clear line, one that Jason's ATV was about to slam into at full speed. Debbie may have thought she ran River Oaks, but she didn't know I was building the one thing that could stop her kingdom in its tracks. A boundary she couldn't manipulate. A fence, 10 feet tall, HOA legal, and ready to change everything. The fence crew showed up at 7 a.m. sharp, all business and black coffee. They unloaded planks like they were building an ark, and by noon, the skeleton of my suburban Berlin Wall was taking shape, 10 feet tall. Cedar planks, stained to match the HOA's sacred earth tone palette. The posts went in deep, anchored in concrete like I was preparing for a hurricane of HOA rage. Which, let's be honest, I was. This wasn't a fence, it was a boundary declaration. a line in the mulch that said, "This land is not your shortcut. This land is not your son's dirt track. This land is mine." And while most people install fences for privacy, I installed mine like I was preparing for a siege. I had no illusions. I wasn't just building a barrier. I was laying the first brick in a war I didn't start, but sure as hell planned to finish. As the crew dug along the property line, they found something interesting: pieces of an old wooden fence, long rotted but unmistakably man-made. Turns out, my uncle had tried to draw that same line years ago. The posts had been pulled up, likely accidentally, during some past dispute, but the message was clear. This wasn't the first time someone in this family tried to keep the HOA at bay. And back then, it seems, they lost. Not this time. I took pictures, documented the remnants, and added them to the growing file I called Exhibit A through Z. Meanwhile, my hidden cameras were catching neighborhood gawkers like flies on honey. People slowed their dog walks to a crawl. One lady walked past 3 times with the same Pomeranian, like maybe repetition made it legal. By Sunday night, the fence was complete. 10 feet of pure, HOA-approved defiance with bold, laminated signs every 20 feet. Private property. No trespassing. This is not a trail. This is a fence. Deal with it. It was beautiful. It was sturdy. It was petty poetry. And right on schedule. At 6:30 IA-min Monday morning, the storm arrived in yoga pants and righteous indignation. Debbie Richardson was pounding on my front door like I'd set fire to her begonias. Through the peephole, I saw her clutching a folder, phone in one hand, fury in the other. I took a deep breath, hit record on my phone, and opened the door. "Morning, Debbie," I said with a smile that probably made her want to commit a misdemeanor. She didn't even say hello. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You built a 10-foot wall without HOA approval. My son couldn't get to the trails this morning, and now he's devastated. You've disrupted a community tradition. And don't think I haven't already called Steve from the board. You'll be getting a violation notice and a fine. This isn't over." Her voice cracked from how fast she'd jammed that all into one breath. I just nodded, holding my phone up like a mic. "Debbie, my fence complies with HOA regulations. It's within height limits, it's on my property, and as for your trail, there's no recorded easement. That means your son's been trespassing." She blinked, then narrowed her eyes like I'd insulted her favorite casserole recipe. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been on this board for 15 years. I know every regulation, every person at City Hall. If you think a few laminated signs and a hardware store fence are going to protect you, you're in for a very rude awakening." And that's when Steve Williams pulled into my driveway in a silver Lexus that looked like it only drove to HOA meetings and overpriced brunch spots. Debbie spun around dramatically, announcing, "Steve, thank God, he's ruining everything." Steve stepped out with the energy of a man who had been dragged into a fight before his first cup of coffee. He looked at the fence, then at me, then at Debbie, and sighed like a man who just realized he was about to spend his morning refereeing HOA Thunderdome. "Mr. Miller," he said cautiously, "we've received concerns." I invited them both inside. Not because I wanted to, but because I wanted a witness and excellent acoustics for my audio recording. We sat in my living room like it was a courtroom. I handed Steve the binder. Property deed, survey maps, HOA fence regulations, all highlighted like a college thesis. Then I played the footage from my cameras. Jason, Haiti, ATV, same path, over and over. Dates, timestamps. I even added a spreadsheet, because I'm that guy. Steve flipped through the paperwork, his expression shifting from politely uncomfortable to visibly annoyed. Debbie, meanwhile, looked like someone had replaced her espresso with battery acid. "There's no easement," Steve muttered, reading. "Fence complies with height limits. Material matches the approved list." He glanced at the camera footage, squinting. "Jason's riding that early? That's a noise ordinance issue," Debbie snapped. "You're taking his side? After all I've done for this community?" She turned to me. lowering her voice like a threat laced with frosting. "You've made a powerful enemy, Miller." I didn't blink. "Are you threatening me, Debbie?" Because Section 7.3 of the HOA Charter clearly defines intimidation of neighbors as grounds for removal from the board. She opened her mouth to respond, but Steve cut her off. "That's enough. We're done here. Mr. Miller, thank you for your time." As they walked out, Debbie paused on the porch and turned back. "Funny thing about old properties," she said sweetly. "Wiring gets unpredictable. Fires start for no reason." I stared at her, dead silent, and raised my phone just high enough for her to see I was still recording. Her smile didn't even flinch as she walked away. I stood there for a moment, staring at my new fence, the war now very much underway, and all I could think was, she brought the president, I brought receipts. The community center smelled like old coffee and old grudges, and the folding chairs had that unmistakable squeak every time someone shifted with judgment. Normally, HOA meetings drew about 7 people, most of them half listening while scrolling through their phones. But tonight, standing room only. Word had spread fast. Debbie had stirred the pot so hard, folks showed up just to watch it boil over. Steve Williams sat at the front, looking like a pastor forced to mediate a brawl at a bingo night. His tie was crooked, his face tight, and the clipboard in his hands looked more like a shield than an agenda. Debbie was already perched in the front row, legs crossed, smile strained, surrounded by the same people who probably wrote Karen on neighborhood ballots without irony. They walked in with a laptop, a flash drive, a manila folder that could double as a courtroom briefcase, and enough receipts to start a CVS. Steve cleared his throat. "Next item on the agenda. Concerns raised regarding fence compliance and community access path at 47 Oak Lane, property of Mr. Ethan Miller." Debbie stood up like her name had just been called at a pageant. "I move that the board vote to require Mr. Miller to remove the non-compliant fence within 7 days or face daily fines." Someone seconded it. Of course they did. But Steve turned to me. "Mr. Miller, would you like to respond before we proceed?" "Oh, would I?" I stepped up, plugged in my flash drive, and loaded a simple slideshow. "Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ethan, and I'd like to set the record straight. First slide. My property deed. No easement recorded. This land is mine. Next, the HOA bylaws on fences, height, material, color, placement, all highlighted. My fence checks every box, folks. Then came the security footage. Jason on his ATV, early mornings, full volume, tearing up my land. This happened over a dozen times. I didn't build a fence to be difficult. I built it to stop this." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Eyebrows raised. People leaned forward. I paused for dramatic effect. I also want to address the smear campaign that's been floating around Facebook, Nextdoor, and, let's be honest, probably whispered over casserole. I've kept quiet while I was called selfish, unfriendly, and anti-community. But I've got the receipts, and I'm not afraid to read them aloud. Debbie's smile cracked slightly, just enough to notice. Then, from the back, a voice cut through. "I'm Maria Martinez. Debbie reported us to the HOA 3 times when we painted our house beige. Beige, people, and it was on the approved palette." Another voice. "I'm the Johnsons' kid's dad. Debbie called the cops on our daughter's 16th birthday party for being too loud at 8 p.m. We had a permit. She stood in our yard and recorded us for an hour. The dam broke." One by one, neighbors stood up like they were at a revival meeting. "She fined us for having too many flower pots. She threatened us over leaving a trash bin out overnight. She told me my wind chime was disruptive to community harmony." The room shifted. You could feel it. Her base, her loyal pack of clipboard disciples, started looking sideways. Steve looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. Debbie stood abruptly, voice high and sharp. "This is ridiculous. We're here to discuss his fence, not my past duties. He's blocking a community trail." Steve raised a hand. "Debbie, we've established there is no community trail. There's no easement. His fence complies. This meeting is not for personal attacks." She turned toward me, eyes narrowed, voice low but dripping with venom. "You'll regret this, Miller. You don't belong here." I didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Debbie, I belong here more than an HOA that weaponizes rules against its neighbors." Steve turned to the crowd. "All those in favor of requiring Mr. Miller to remove his fence?" A few shaky hands went up, 5 total. "All those opposed?" A wave of arms. 35. Steve nodded solemnly. "The motion is rejected." Debbie stood frozen, blinking like her program had crashed. Then, without another word, she grabbed her bag, muttered something under her breath about ungrateful people, and stormed out the double doors like she expected someone to follow. No one did. I stayed seated, quiet, not smiling. But inside I was already rewriting the HOA bylaws in my head. Because this was just the end of Act 1. 3 days after the HOA meeting, just when the neighborhood started to feel a little less like a minefield and a little more like a place to breathe, I came back from the grocery store to find my fence in pieces. Not dented, not nudged, destroyed. Panels ripped off, posts cracked in half like snapped pencils, and right across the remains, in thick red spray paint, were the words, "Don't mess with Richardson." Subtle, right? Nothing says innocent misunderstanding like a middle-of-the-day demolition and a spray-painted threat that sounds like it was written by a budget action movie villain. I dropped my groceries on the porch, pulled out my phone, and started documenting everything: video, photos, timestamps. Then I called the police, because this wasn't a spat anymore. This was calculated, and whoever did it didn't just want to send a message. They wanted me scared. Officer Ryan Parker arrived 20 minutes later, stepping out of his cruiser with the weary gait of a man who's seen enough HOA disputes to know when things are about to get spicy. He took one look at the wreckage and muttered, "Jesus, someone had an axe to grind." I told him about the ongoing issues, about the meeting, about Debbie and her son Jason, and he nodded slowly, like a man connecting dots he already knew were suspicious. "Ah, the Richardsons." His voice dropped into that special tone reserved for frequent flyers in the complaint department. "Yeah, we've had a few calls involving them over the years. Most didn't go anywhere, but a couple neighbors filed reports. Nothing this bold, though." He knelt by one of the tire tracks in the mud. "That's an ATV tread, not standard. You got footage?" I grinned and handed him my phone. The next morning, the new cameras were already installed. Real ones this time. Not just disguised birdhouses, but infrared, night vision, motion tracking, cloud-backed security beasts. I wanted this place lit up like Fort Knox. Tom Jenkins, my new friend and retired lawyer 3 doors down, stopped by that afternoon with a thermos of coffee and the casual look of a man who'd taken on bigger snakes than Debbie. "Heard what happened," he said, handing me the coffee. "You okay?" "Physically? Yeah," I said. "But I'm done playing defense." Tom nodded approvingly. "Good, because Debbie plays dirty, but she plays from a script. That's her weakness. You mess up her plan, and she spirals." I smiled, sipping the coffee. "Then let's make her spiral." That evening, I received an email from Linda Cooper, the HOA secretary. Subject line, "Documentation you should see." Inside were attachments, lots of them. PDFs of board meeting minutes, email threads, internal memos, stuff that clearly wasn't meant to leave the clubhouse printer. In one of those emails, Debbie referred to my property as a necessary access point for a pending development partnership. Another thread included her back and forth with a developer named Robert Coleman, discussing future road access and projected profits from a high-end resort expansion bordering the neighborhood's backside. At the center of it all, my land, my fence, my right to say no. Turns out, the community trail was never about neighborhood tradition. It was about cutting through private land to save hundreds of thousands in development costs. And the cherry on top? A scanned copy of a private investment agreement. Debbie wasn't just supporting the development, she was a silent partner with a 10% stake. That explained everything. Her obsession, the threats, the smear campaign. She hadn't just lost access to a trail, She'd lost her golden ticket to luxury commissions and backroom deals. Her power in the HOA? Just the cover story. Turns out her community service was just a stepping stone to her new yacht. Linda ended the email with one line. I can't say this publicly yet, but I'm done letting her bully this neighborhood. Use this however you see fit. I stared at my screen, every piece of the puzzle falling into place. I wasn't just dealing with an overzealous HOA queen. I was standing in the way of a backdoor land grab, and they were willing to play dirty to get through me. What Debbie didn't know, though, was that she'd just handed me everything I needed to burn her whole playbook to the ground. I didn't come to River Oaks for a war. But now I had a reason to finish it. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I served mine with a strong Wi-Fi signal and just the right amount of meme magic. Armed with Linda's documents, security footage, and more HOA violations than a 4th of July block party, I fired off a digital bomb. I compiled everything, emails, contracts, meeting minutes, before and after shots of my fence, and footage of Jason's dirt track escapades, and sent them out in one glorious Dropbox link. Recipients: every HOA board member, local news reporter Emily Clark, and the district attorney's office. For good measure, I posted a redacted summary on the neighborhood Facebook group with a teaser. If you've ever been fined for your flower pots, you're going to want to read this. By lunchtime, it had over 300 comments and enough popcorn gifts to cater a Netflix premiere. Then the memes started rolling in. Someone photoshopped Debbie's head onto a Monopoly card that said, "Go directly to legal trouble. Do not pass HOA. Do not collect commissions." Another had a screenshot of my fence with the caption, "This is not just a fence, it's a lifestyle." By the next morning, the local news website ran a headline that stopped traffic. Literally, HOA scandal, land, lies, and the fence that blew it all open. Emily's article laid it all out. Debbie's secret investment, her abuse of power, the resort development, and her failed attempts to intimidate me into silence. It even included a quote from Officer Parker confirming an active vandalism investigation. The real twist came when the DA's office released a statement. They were officially reviewing the allegations. That's when the web really started to unravel. Turns out Robert Coleman, the developer Debbie had partnered with, was connected to Mayor Wilson, as in the mayor of our town, who had quietly signed off on fast-track zoning changes for the resort. And as luck or corruption would have it, Mayor Wilson's brother-in-law just happened to sit on Coleman's board. So now it wasn't just HOA drama, it was a full-blown municipal scandal. From picket fences to city hall indictments, Debbie's little shortcut was looking more like a one-way street to court dates and campaign resignations. You'd think with the public turning, the DA sniffing around, and the news story exploding online, Debbie would have taken a hint and backed off. But no. Debbie went full scorched earth. 2 nights later, just past sundown, my security app pinged. Motion detected. I pulled up the live feed, and there they were. Jason and 3 of his buddies, hoodies up, baseball bats in hand, walking up my driveway like they were filming a low-budget remake of The Purge HOA edition. What they didn't know was that my cameras didn't just record. They streamed in real time, and I'd already put Officer Parker on speed dial. Floodlights kicked on like stadium lights, and a pre-recorded voice blared from hidden speakers. "You are being recorded. Law enforcement has been notified." The boys froze mid-step, looking like raccoons caught in a refrigerator raid. Before they could make a move, a cruiser rolled up. Officer Parker stepped out, calm as ever. "Evening, gentlemen. I assume this isn't a scheduled neighborhood watch shift." They'd tried to run, but it was too late. Parents were called, statements were taken. Jason's face went from smug to soggy in 10 minutes flat. Debbie showed up 20 minutes later in full meltdown mode, screaming about entrapment and defamation, while Parker calmly wrote citations for trespassing and menacing. The video made its way online within hours, thanks to an anonymous upload. Not saying it was me, but I do have a strong upload speed. The image of Jason, bat in hand, frozen under the floodlights, became the visual mascot for HOA kids gone wild. And my fence? Oh, that fence. It became more than wood and screws. It became a symbol. Neighbors started calling it Stonehenge. People took selfies in front of it. Someone even left a gnome with a sign that said, "The line must be drawn here." What started as a quiet property boundary had turned into a monument of resistance. Proof that one man, one fence, and one set of laminated bylaws could bring down an empire of HOA nonsense. And me? I just kept drinking my coffee on the porch, watching the chaos from behind 10 feet of cedar and poetic justice. The emergency HOA meeting was packed tighter than a church potluck after a sermon on sin. Word had spread fast. Between the news coverage, the viral footage, and Debbie's meltdown being replayed more than a Super Bowl ad, people came ready for a reckoning. Steve Williams stood at the front like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 days. He looked tired, remorseful, and maybe a little relieved that the curtain was finally being pulled back. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice low but steady. "Serious allegations have been raised regarding our board's transparency, and tonight we need to address them together." Then he looked right at me and nodded. "Ethan Miller has prepared a presentation I believe everyone deserves to see." I walked to the front, not with vengeance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had every receipt, every video, and every piece of evidence lined up like dominoes. I kept it simple, laid it out, no theatrics, just the truth, and when I was done, the room was silent. Then Steve stepped back up, cleared his throat, and delivered the kind of confession you only see in courtroom dramas or last episodes of Prestige TV. "I've served as HOA president for 8 years, and in that time I failed in my responsibilities. I allowed favoritism, I ignored warning signs, and I turned a blind eye to actions that I now regret. I owe this community an apology." A few people gasped. Debbie, sitting alone in the front row, stared straight ahead like she'd been turned to stone. "Therefore," Steve continued, "I'm resigning effective immediately after this meeting, and I propose we take a vote to remove Debbie Richardson from her position as vice president." The vote wasn't even close. 42 in favor, 2 opposed. Debbie stood slowly, her hands clenched, her eyes locked on me like she still believed she could outmaneuver the storm. "You'll hear from my attorney," she said as she walked out. Someone near the door muttered, "The Queen has left the cul-de-sac." And just like that, the air shifted. With Debbie gone and Steve stepping aside, something strange and wonderful started to happen. People started acting like neighbors again. A committee was formed right there on the spot to revise the HOA bylaws. Transparency, term limits, ethics rules. It all got drafted and voted on within a month. No more lifetime appointments, no more closed-door decisions. Every homeowner got access to meeting minutes, upcoming votes, and a simple way to challenge decisions without needing to hire a lawyer. We even added a digital voting system, my contribution of course, to make it easier for people to participate without needing to sit through 3-hour meetings and passive-aggressive snack tables. And the best part? People started smiling again. Not out of fear or politeness, but real connection. They waved, they offered help, they even asked me for fence contractor recommendations. Debbie's ghost didn't haunt the neighborhood, her downfall had cleansed it. A few weeks after the dust settled, Jason came by, not with an attitude or a bat, but with a notebook and a nervous smile. "Hey, Mr. Miller," he said. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I was being a punk, and I didn't really understand what my mom was doing. I just thought I was riding where I always had, but it wasn't cool. I know that now. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't for show. It was a kid trying to do better." I shook his hand and nodded. "Thanks for saying that. We all mess up. What matters is what you do after." Then I handed him a little permission slip I'd laminated myself. "If you ever want to walk that trail again, no engines, just show me this." He laughed. "Seriously?" "Seriously," I said. "The trail's still there. It just runs through respect now." That weekend I hosted a barbecue on the old trailhead. Neighbors brought food, folding chairs, stories, even a few apologies. Someone put up a handmade sign that read, the gate that saved the neighborhood. And for the first time since I moved in, River Oaks Estates felt like home. I still keep the fence up. It's solid, weathered now, but it stands tall, like it earned the right to be more than just a barrier. Because it did. That fence didn't just protect my backyard, it protected the idea that standing up doesn't have to mean screaming. That doing your homework, keeping your cool, and recording everything with a timestamp can be more powerful than any angry letter or veiled threat. A fence isn't just wood, it's a boundary, and when built right, it protects everyone on both sides. So no, you don't have to be a Karen to have a voice in your neighborhood. You just need a spine, a set of bylaws, and maybe a couple of cloud-connected security cameras, and if you're lucky, a neighbor like Tom, a secretary like Linda, and a crowd full of people who eventually remember what it means to live in a community. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to say, "This stops here." And if that person happens to hold a nail gun in one hand and a permit in the other, even better. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.